Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
seeing my community be left out and not seeing people like me in political office, and then seeing someone who is very similar to me be part of the conversation. I was like, well, worst case scenario, all I'll do is further the conversation. And to my surprise, come the general election, I was the highest vote getter in town.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Hey, thank you for the kind words in response to last week's mini episode of sorts where I just laid out some of my thoughts in support of Black Lives Matter. This episode, this interview you're about to hear, was recorded before the George Floyd news story and the subsequent demonstrations across the country, but it gets into some of the same points that have been brought up with regard to the lack of certain life experiences in politics or in government or leadership or authority. Our guest this week, Justin Farmer, is a local elected official who's running for a state legislative seat, and his story of getting into public service involves his experiences not only as a young Black man, but also as someone with Tourette Syndrome, who understands the disability experience and being misjudged for outward characteristics. We talk Tourette, misophonia, awkward public experiences with coprolalia, and the valuable commodity of empathy in public office. He says, quote, "I always worry about people potentially perceiving me in a threatening manner," end quote. That conversation is ahead on this episode. We're rounding out Tourette Awareness Month, running May 15th through June 15th each year. Take a bow. Not to be cheesy, but I saw so much great messaging, and it's worth pointing out that you guys, I think, really have the hang of awareness messaging and style. And that's to say, I didn't see anything that was inundating or just too much at once for the audience to digest. The point of awareness efforts is for the messaging to stick and be something people want to be interested in and connect with, not to be inundated and overwhelmed with messaging. Like, you got to strike a balance when you're doing this. And I like how you guys kept a rhythm that kind of worked in that spirit. Even those of you who shared stuff every single day on social media knew how to do it subtly enough. Just putting up an interesting Tourette fact in an Instagram story. Like, if I'm looking at an Instagram story, it's something that I'm looking at for, 3 seconds, and then it's gone, it's over. And if it's just one little fact about TS, that's not too much for me to remember. And even if I don't remember what the fact is, there's still that rhythm of Tourette content that I'm seeing. Like, does that make sense? Like, it's not a 30-minute video we're asking people to sit down and watch so they can be aware. It's just a quick part of the social media scenery, and it'll make the impression it makes. And the more normalized this stuff is on the landscape, the better. So thank you so much for those efforts. I also appreciate that the awareness messaging and the efforts didn't interfere or mesh badly with the Black Lives Matter messaging, which really did need to be put forward. Like I said last week, the Tourette community is uniquely situated to be empathetic to different life experiences. Like, whatever your unique experience is, I may not live it, but I get the concept of not being taken at my word or being misjudged. The Black experience is something entirely different, obviously. So don't take what I'm saying as, like this white guy with TS thinks he knows what it's like to be Black. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is I appreciate how this community is ready to listen to other people's experiences and take them seriously. Just because Tourette Awareness Month is coming to a close doesn't mean our whole gig comes to a halt. Head to Tourette.org and click Attend an Event to see what's coming up for the Tourette community. Because awareness is not just for the outside world, it's within the Tourette community too. And I'm always trying to educate myself about this disorder. Still, it's something I live with, but again, I'm not an expert on it. There's still tons I need to learn about it from a scientific perspective, from a management perspective. So if you go to Tourette.org and click Attend an Event, here are a few things that come up. June 15th, Tourette Basics. That's an Instagram Live event. June 16th, the next day, it's Navigating Family and Personal Relationships. That's a webinar. June 20th, my birthday, there's a podcast discussion, not Tourette's podcast. It's a podcast called Saturday Mornings with Joy Keys. June 23rd, a Facebook Live event called TS, Mental Health and Resiliency Building. again, on June 23rd. That's massively important. If you're having a difficult time at the intersection of Tourette syndrome and mental health, which I've certainly dealt with, then please give this a chance. Again, Tourette.org, and click on Attend an Event. We're about to get to this week's conversation, but quick shout out to Kelly Mason, who just let me know that she started the podcast from the very beginning, season 1, episode 0, and has caught up to where we are now. Kelly, welcome. Thanks. That's awesome. And Kelly, I think you had a question that I was supposed to read on the show. I can't find it. This is, I had it. This is my Tourette chaos brain thinking that I could find this question that you put forward for the show. Message me, tell me what it was, because I want to honor all questions that come in. I do have some other questions waiting in the mailbag, but I want to clear the way for this conversation this week because it's such a great one. We'll get to all the questions and maybe even just do a Q&A episode before long. Send your questions to tourettespodcast@gmail.com. That might be fun, just a pure mailbag episode where you can ask me anything and everything. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. This is not a fast talking episode. We really take a good, easy pace talking with Justin about his experiences, and we spend time on it, not hurrying something so important, but some real lessons on underrepresentation of certain communities in public office, and the importance of highlighting not only the need for it, for better representation, but also the people who are examples of that to follow, like Justin. He has a really interesting story of getting into local office, and we're going to hear from him right now.
My name is Justin Farmer. I am city councilor in Hamden, Connecticut. I am a millennial, a man of color, and I'm from the East Coast.
And you're also running for higher office too. And in asking that, I'll let the audience know this is not like a paid campaign spot or anything like that. This is just an interview like we always do them. But kind of where we're going is also kind of part of the story. So you're running for, is it state senate?
Yeah, I'm running for the 17th Senate District. So Connecticut, we have 36 state senators, and I am running for one of those spots.
So what brought you to, so you're serving in local government right now, in local office. How long have you been in that spot?
I've been elected for 2.5 years now.
Is governance or politics, I mean, is that something that kind of runs deep with you? Is that something you discovered sometimes? So in my day job, I work with local government officials, and I do multimedia work, but it's in a government affairs context. I work with a lot of mayors, a lot of council people, all different walks of life, all different sizes of municipality. And it's interesting, I guess, kind of hearing why they got interested in this kind of work to begin with. And there's always kind of a cool story or just some spark that hit them, or they saw somebody that inspired them and reminded them of themselves. And they're like, this is something I could do. What led you into wanting to serve in public office?
Ironically enough, I borrow a term from Jumaane Williams and call myself the activist elected official. For those who don't know, Jumaane is the public advocate for New York City. But before that, he was a city councilor for New York City. And part of my story is seeing him. But initially, in 2016, I worked on some campaigns for college credit, being part of the political science department for my undergrad degree. A professor, he was just like, yeah, you should work on a campaign if you're in the political science department. And I was just like, yeah, but y'all are a bunch of sellouts and feds. So I'm an activist. I don't know about that. And he's like, yeah, well, you don't have to, but you can do like a research paper and projects and like 20 pages, or you can knock on some doors and talk to voters. I was like, you know what? Campaigns sound like the coolest thing ever. So I worked on campaign in 2016 for class credit and worked in a pretty suburban community, and often got asked if I was part of that community. Was I from here? Like, I didn't seem like I was part of their community. And by the end of it, this is 2016 election. So Trump was running, and seeing him make fun of Sergey, the reporter who has, physical deformities, where Trump on national television was making fun of him. I was just like, yeah, all the glass ceilings are broken. And my good friend, who also was the campaign manager for one of the Senate campaigns we were working on, he's like, dude, I'm going to run next year. You should run too. And every other week for like 4 or 5 weeks straight, like, yeah, I don't really have public transportation. Like, how am I going to be able to run for office if I don't have a vehicle? No, you're fine. I'll give you a ride. Well, I'm broke and like I don't have money to raise to run a campaign. Like, oh, you're fine. I'm like, yeah, well, I got Tourette's. Like, I don't know. This doesn't make sense. You're fine. We'll figure it out. An election night happened. Trump won. And I woke up the next morning and I said, I'm going to run an issues campaign, and I'm just going to talk about the issues we have in town and how that it's part of the national conversation. So I ran an issues campaign and basically saying like, hey, we've been underfunding our schools. We don't talk about race or culture in my community. And, the community center that we have needed to be knocked over before I was born. So we're setting people up to fail. Like, how can we say we're surprised when we are allowing generations of people to be left out of the conversation? And to my surprise, I won by 23 votes in a primary, and just turned 23 the month before. And during running, I had a friend from New York who told me about Jumaane Williams. Like, yeah, if you're really worried about Tourette's, there's this guy who is in city council in New York. He's amazing. Check him out. And I just, I was probably a week or two from like making a decision about running. And then I just saw Jumaane on a public, like newsroom, just taking questions and just, I think only once he apologized. He's like, oh, sorry, I have Tourette's. And it was just like a misnomer. Like, it wasn't like, oh, God bless you, my bad. And just kept going on talking about the issues.
So he's ticking while they're asking him questions about his job and about his vision and everything.
Yeah. And I'm just like, wow, like people accept that. And then I kind of thought, well, maybe it's just a New York thing. Because the city is different from a lot of other places in the country.
Yeah.
So I happen to wear noise canceling headphones all the time. So, I wear the noise canceling headphones probably 15 to 17 hours a day, because it just sensory is something that really affects my tics. So I'm like, cool, I'm going to be wearing a shirt and tie and headphones. And in most conversations, when I address people, like automatically they're going to be put off. And to my surprise, most people were very accepting. And if they did ask me about the headphones, most people were really respectful, and they're like, oh, cool, no big problem. Like, yeah, like, that's not a problem. Like, what are you running for? Like, what are the issues that are important to you? Like, no. That, like, your disability, that, like, no, that's not a factor. Like, what drives you? And so all that to say, like, that, those experiences of kind of, seeing my community be left out and not seeing people like me in political office, and then seeing someone who is very similar to me be part of the conversation. I was like, well, worst case scenario, all I'll do is further the conversation. And to my surprise, come the general election, I was the highest vote getter in town.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So it's in 2 election cycles in a row now. So it's been really humbling to see my community support me. Where now I don't really think about the fact about me having a disability and that being a barrier.
That's amazing, because a few episodes ago, the guest I was talking with, we kind of pointed this out about the thing that sometimes happens where you'll see a headline where it's, first African American to serve this role or first woman to serve this role, and then you'll see people kind of comment saying, well, who cares if it's a woman? Who cares if it's a Black person? Who, it doesn't the job they're doing matter? And I always think like, no, it's really important for people to see themselves represented in roles to kind of create that inspiration. And just as you were talking about, not necessarily seeing the community that you come from reflected in the place you kind of wanted to go to, then seeing Jumaane Williams, there's a template, there's, there's an example there. And that can be really transformative for people who want to see that kind of thing and have something to relate to. So it doesn't feel like it's just kind of like a first time effort that might not work. And I think is the same could be applied to the Tourette community, obviously, kind of in these advanced roles where they are influencing things and they are making a difference. And one thing that I hear really often from the Tourette community, people who write in when they talk about their favorite things about having Tourette, is the sense of empathy that they have, where it's, they're in a position where they may be judged inappropriately, or someone may make some sort of determination about them and how far they can go, that may be is completely baseless, because you're seeing that person for something that they're not. You're making a guess about them because they have a disorder or a disability that you're just mischaracterizing in your mind. And that sense of empathy, I think, is something that can be a real big strength for people, especially in aspiring to public office, to where you're supposed to be a listening ear for the people and relate to people and the stories that they have, to help you figure out, what are the policies we need to kind of lift the boats and put people in better positions. I mean, have you kind of thought about it that way, that sense of empathy that you can develop from having something like Tourette syndrome?
Yeah, no, definitely. I had a hard time in school, especially my sophomore, junior, senior year. Around junior year, I started to realize something was going on. And I kind of read through the DSM. I skipped Tourette's because I was like, oh, that's just people who curse. I don't do that. And I skipped anorexia because I'm like, yeah, I'm not anorexic. I'm not bulimic. I know that's not something that I'm struggling with. Figured out like, oh, I probably have OCD, and then got tested. And it's like, yeah, you have OCD. I'm like, oh, like that makes a lot of sense. Like,
yeah.
But I eventually got tested, but that whole entire experience of dealing with school and trying to figure out, why am I getting such a hard time for advocating for myself? After that whole experience, like I want to be a marine biologist. I'm studying to be a marine biologist, but fighting for my education changed my perspective, where before that, I was like, people are a lost cause. We just need to focus on the environment and like animals. And like, that's how I will help the greater mission, is I'm just going to help us, prevent climate change, and other people who are more empathetic, more understanding, better auditors, they'll be able to bring community together and figure out the other things. But my part is just to play with fish and to figure out the ocean. And after that experience, it's kind of funny, where I'll laugh all the time, where I'll be in a crowded subway or on a bus or something, or just in a space or in a meeting, like a political space. And despite being the person with headphones, noise canceling headphones, people will pick up on something about me being approachable, or like any other person, it'd be like the universal sign of like, this person does not care about your issues, does not want to engage, does not want to be present in whatever's going on, to something that draws people to me, and also something that, you know, when people speak loudly at me, like, "Hey, can you hear me? Do you know
Right.
what's going?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, hey, I can hear you." And like just having that sense of humor and being able to connect with people in a different way, where I, all that to say, I've literally had some people come up to me or wonder, like, man, this guy is really rude with the headphones. One good friend who was, you know, never asked me about it, but always thought, man, this guy is rude. He's always wearing his headphones. He's always being rude. Who later, when they found out why I wore the headphones, they said, I have some neurological difficulties with sun and sound, and seeing you just, you know, walk around with your headphones has made me comfortable to, like, wear earmuffs randomly in the summer when I'm having trouble like processing with noise, or wear a hat indoors because I'm just struggling with, lighting, where I feel it's those type of things where when somebody being vulnerable all the time allows us as people, and I think a lot of people with disabilities, just allows us to always come with a different perspective, where we're always trying to think of, like, how am I accommodating other people, and how can I accommodate people?
There's something really important about showing your vulnerability, especially in something like public office, where sometimes the perception is, and this is definitely a conversation where I work sometimes, where people may view local government or government at all as being a little bit inaccessible. Seeing more people at city council meetings and public hearings, and sometimes the chambers can be kind of empty, and people are busy and they have their lives, but there is also this thing where people are, in one sense, maybe cynical about it. In the other sense, it can be kind of intimidating, to approach your government and voice yourself in front of your elected officials. And I think putting that vulnerability out there and really humanizing yourself is a really important part in changing that for people.
Oftentimes, I think the biggest thing about governance, with people feeling that no one's listening, is that maybe I've become so cynical, but there are times, because I'm still very active in activist spaces and organizing spaces, and it kind of will throw me off. Well, people are like, "Yeah, we have a politician here." I'm like, "Oh, cool." I'm like, "Yeah, who?" They're like, "You." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, no, me." Like, "Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, no, yeah." And I think it's just changing that culture, where when we see more people who look like us, who sound like us, who know about our experiences, it becomes less daunting. Like, so many people from across the country, across the globe, will visit the squad's office. Where, I've literally seen people where it's like, cool, you went to DC, you visited AOC's office, but you didn't visit the person who represents you. Like, you don't even know who that is, but you knew
right
where to find someone who you feel aligns with your values and your principles. To your point, yeah, like, we often find it, but when we elect and find people who are, kind of find the people we perceive to be where we are, and will be empathetic to that, that's where you really have the power of local government, where, you find one person who cares about, whether a stop sign should be there or not. And you find that one ally, and it is the biggest thing, where it's like, wow, like, this is something you're really passionate about. I don't know where that rift was going, but yeah.
I did a project a little while back on sort of how to involve kids more with government and with local government, with their city council, with their Parks and Rec department. Just some experience to give them a positive experience with government. And the focus was on building municipal skate parks. As there are kids out there, they're getting in trouble. They're getting tickets even in some cases, maybe getting arrested for skating out in a public space where there may be a city ordinance that forbids that. And what do? We want them to be out recreating, being healthy, but they're kind of up against this, they've chosen skating as one of their ways of recreating and being out, making friendships, the camaraderie, but they're getting in trouble for doing it. How about we get our city government? We can bring this to the government and say, we think this is a great solution to this whole thing, and it'll give these kids a positive experience working with local government, maybe even helping, with the design process or finding a designer for the skate park or, planning events, just something like that to give a positive experience. And it works so often. Just when you find that new angle to get people involved, or at least see how they can play a role when previously they didn't. And it's a really, really powerful thing to find those angles. And if you have that in a person that you can relate to, I mean, that's gigantic.
Yeah, no, oftentimes we'll see people. I can think of at least 8 or 9 times where people have from all across the state have said, my kid wears headphones to just deal with sensory issues. Sometimes people who don't even have Tourette's, who just have processes dealing with sensory, where they're like, cool, I know about you, so I'm reaching out to you on this question because I know you're part of this system, and I feel like you're someone who's going to listen to my questions and concerns.
Yeah, it's like speaking the same language or something. Just that relatability. We'll be right back. The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette Syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit tourette.org, TOURETTE.org. And curious too, with the sensory issues with the light and sound, is it misophonia, or is it something that you've put a label on that you've learned more about, or is this just more of a personal experience that you've kind of in your own creative ways learned how to manage?
It's definitely misophonia. Like most high schools, or maybe I'm projecting. But, the beginning of the year, people would pull the fire alarm. Some people would call in bomb threats and just be ridiculous. But, we would take it seriously. We'd clear out the school and the fire alarm would go off. And for me, I ended up having mini seizures where my body would just, my legs would go, my arms would go, phonic tics. I do happen to have, I always joke about how lucky I am because I have cochlearia. So I'm that rare 10% of the 200,000 of us. So lucky me. But it would go off and I'd just fall to the ground like a sack of potatoes. In the first week, we maybe had the first 2 weeks, we had 4 or 5 fire alarms go off. And probably the third time I just had my headphones, I turned on the noise canceling and put them on and kind of just gripped them close to my ears and just kind of, waited out the fire alarm. I was in the hallway, so I kind of already fell onto the ground in the hallway and just was kind of there. and I was by the nurse's office, so they knew it was a fire drill. So I was already on my way there, and like I just like stayed there until it was over, and I was still
Wow.
taking a bit, but it wasn't like there have been times where I've gone to the emergency room because of my tics. So, um,
Wow.
yeah, it's been something that has been helpful to combat. Also, as you know, when we try to hold in our tics all day, it just makes it worse later on.
Yeah.
So, as most of us, light, sound, touch, living, breathing, are stressors of Tourette's. And surprisingly, politics is a place that is somewhat stressful. So I've heard.
It can be.
Where it just helps me navigate through a day where instead of 30, 50, 60 north ticks a minute, I'm down to like 3 a minute, which is way more manageable. And especially
Yeah.
when you never know, like I might say F off and die in a well, or I might say no to drugs. Like it's just less anxiety when you do that, a couple of times a minute versus like, oh, I might have 10 or 15 ticks, within the next 30 minutes of this meeting. I pray to God I don't say I'll slap the back off a 7 and then have to try to explain what that means because I don't even know what that means myself.
But have there been occasions to where during public meetings where your coprolalia has come out, or have you had to explain it in real time?
So there's been times. So one of my good friends, I am the youngest on the city council, and one of our oldest members, who is close to 3 times my age, really amazing person, Harry. He's a really old school guy, and this was after a long public hearing. We had a police shooting in my community last year, and obviously emotions really high.
Yeah.
And Harry was there afterwards because we broke bread and were eating together. And I saw him, and I wanted to make a couple of jokes with him, and I was just excited. I was frustrated, I was upset, but I was excited because I'm like, cool, now I can like cut up and make jokes with my good friend Harry. And I saw him, and I just cocked back my hand and just like pointed at him, and I was like, "You're a bitch," and like I was like, "Oh, like." That is not what I wanted to say. Like that.
What'd he do?
His face.
Did his eyes go wide open, or
he was mortified? He was upset. I could tell he was pissed, but he realized like almost right away that it was a tic. So it's just kind of weird because he's like, I want to be upset, but I know I can't. And like, I know Justin didn't mean to do that, but like I did it in front of all of our colleagues where I just loudly blurted out like, yeah, like all that to say, I think my favorite anecdote is on this first campaign. I had high school students and some other people in the campaign office, and I'm giving a pep talk before they go out to knock on doors. And at the time, one of my tics was sex on the beach.
Okay.
And can I have sex? Were like just things that would just come out, which was very awkward and very
yeah. While you're knocking on doors.
Thank God, not on doors, but like I was like talking and like, yeah, we're gonna go out there, we're gonna knock on doors, talk about what's important to us. Can I have sex? Da 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 da. And someone was like, and I noticed I said it, and I just like kept going and tried to pretend that I didn't say anything, because I'm like, cool, if I act normal, like most people will be like, oh, I misheard. That was weird.
Yeah, yeah.
I must have misheard. And like I got through most of it. Like I got another 2 minutes and like nobody said anything. And like someone raised their hand after the monologue and they're like, "What did you say?" I'm like, "What?"
Oh man.
They're like, "No, no, what did you say earlier before?" I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about." They're like, "You said, can I have sex?" And I was like, No." They're like, "No, that's what you said." And like, I always worry about those scenarios because either you have to own it or you have
Yeah.
to like be assertive. And I'm just like, cool. I really don't want to explain my disability to like 40 people right now, randomly. Half of them I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
so it's like, no, I said cars and sets, you know? So like, if it didn't make sense to you, you know, cars and sets. They're like, what? Like, yeah, like you, like when I am married, when I have a partner, you know, I want to emulate her in every way and like mirror each other. So, you know, cars and sets, like have a perfect pair. And that's what you're going to do when you go out on the doors. You're going to be with your partner, like a perfect pair, pick up on each other, finish each other's sentences. And like, that's how you get voters.
Did you have that like canned? Like, had you already thought about that, or is that something you had to pull out on the fly?
I think about alliteration all the time where like,
Yeah.
I just love puns, love dad jokes where it's so like,
Me too.
I'm always like in the back of my head, like, always think of things that sound similar to my tics and like kind of pull it out of my hat where I'm like, oh, I said something cool. Is this a good opportunity to explain Tourette's or do I really not want to spend that emotional energy right now? And I'm just going to pretend I said something else and let people believe that I said something else and just keep moving. So I said this and I'm like, everyone's like, yeah, wow, that's profound. That's really great. I'm like, okay, sure. Awesome. And this dude is like, yeah, that's not what you said. And I'm like, dude, like, what did you do? Like, why? Like, did I do something to you? So I was like, cool. Like, what did I say? And he just dropped the conversation. I was like, dope.
Yeah, I mean, if I was in your position, you know, I would. I think my nerves, and this is just me knowing me. I've never experienced coprolalia. I definitely have tics that, and I've had individual words, but typically those are ones that emerge when I'm not around anybody, and like when I'm just doing things around the house, or I'll have, you know, like certain sentences I'll say in different ways. Like I'll put the emphasis on different syllables, and you know, like do every iteration of that till I'm done, and that doesn't really come out when I'm in public. You know, certain tics do, but it's nothing that's too terribly, I guess, quote unquote, problematic. But you know, like running a campaign, and especially at the legislative level, sometimes the ways that can go, where you know there's opposition work, and sometimes things are kind of intentionally taken out of context when you're trying to, you know, pull the wind out of somebody's sails, like you know your opposing candidate. And I mean, has that crossed your mind about your tics being exploited in that kind of way, or has that happened, or have there been occasions where otherwise where it's been, you know, you've been put in a difficult position because of that, beyond the example you just gave?
All the time I worry about that. That's, you know, um, I'm pretty outside of activism and organizing. I'm basically a Boy Scout. Like I don't drink, don't do drugs, don't smoke. I'm just like the only thing that you'll catch me doing bad is like, oh, he got arrested at an environmental protest. Like, woo. Um, but I always
Right.
worry about like tics where it hasn't happened, but like, oh, like what if, you know, I tick and a mic is hot and it's recorded, you know, is somebody
Yeah.
gonna take that out of context and it's gonna be like, look at Justin Farmer, you know, he laughing about, you know, saying, you know, sex on the beach or, you know, uh, look at Justin Farmer, so violent. Like he said he'll slap the crap out of someone. Um,
Yeah.
where like I couldn't deny like, oh, I definitely did that, but that's not me that was because of Tourette's. So I've always worried. Um, that hasn't really happened. There's also been times where I've been worried where I'll cock back and have like a fist, and I always worry about, especially as a bigger young man of color, I always worry about people potentially perceiving me in a threatening manner. So maybe a video surfacing of me taking, which might
Yeah.
be intimidating, but fingers crossed, knock on wood, that has not actually been a concern. So I'm hoping it will continue to be true.
Yeah, yeah. It gets me thinking too. Sometimes I watch those, true crime shows on TV, and you'll see the prosecutor or the interrogating detective saying, this person is not acting, like a normal person would if their wife just died, or
Yeah.
like just something like that. And I always think about how awkward I can be sometimes, where I may smile at inappropriate times, or just have these weird nervous reactions to things, or it may be like a really somber moment, but I'll see somebody I know, and like somehow my first reaction just kind of like wave, smile at them, and like just something that kind of comes off maybe a little bit weird if someone was looking at me and being like, that guy is not acting right. I always think about that when I'm watching these shows of people who may have their own context that may not easily be applied to the sort of quote unquote normal people world. And if I was in one of those positions, or if someone pointed a finger at me because I like maybe socially might come off a strange way, or someone observed me not acting normally, a guy in his position or a normal person wouldn't be acting like that, and that is almost like a case against that person. There may be an appropriate way in terms of like just how we script ourselves, but when it comes to like ourselves and the sort of variety of people out there, it's really, really led me to kind of withhold. And this kind of goes back to the empathy thing of withholding what I might think about someone, because I don't really know what they have going on.
Yeah.
It's completely because of TS and whatever other sort of nervous things I have. It definitely makes me appreciate all the more people who are in positions like the one you're in, where you are a great example to people, and just the way you described Jumani, people can look to you too. And it makes me wonder: are there other people from the Tourette community who've reached out to you, or aspire to public office or public service in some way, or just in general? I mean, do you have much interaction with the Tourette community?
I used to, so I'm here in Connecticut, so I used to go down, um, you know, at least once or twice a month for social hours for the Tourette's organization. And I spoke at the mentor brunch that they put on, and have gone to like the comedy show. Um, since getting elected, my schedule has been much crazier. I think the first 6 months of me being elected, I did not leave the state. Like I just didn't leave the state for any vacation or any conferences or anything. So, um, I want to get more involved again. But here on the local level, I have people reach out to me all the time. Like even today, somebody shot me a message and like, hey, a student is having a hard time and pretty sure they have TS. Would you mind just like sending a video, just encouraging them? I've had people at least 3 times now where, you know, younger people, like someone else hearing about me, knowing about me, and like, hey, can you speak to this person who has Tourette's, who, is having a hard time figuring out like what being an adult is like, and like what the hardships, and it's been really humbling and inspiring to, I was only diagnosed 7, 8 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing to like 7 or 8 years ago, I'm like, man, I wish I had a mentor. I wish, there's more things locally. Because for me, going to New York City is like hour and a half, 2 hour train ride. So it's like, man, I wish there was somewhere closer to me. I wish there was someone, a better way to like reach out to people who are looking and like learn about and like ask the questions like, cool, I'm about to go on a date and like, do I mention this? Like, do I like wait until it comes up? Like, cool, I'm going to a job interview and I'm wearing my headphones. Like, is it better to disclose my disability, or would it be better to just hope whoever's hiring me doesn't ask any questions and just, deal with it afterwards? So it all that to say, I interact in a way, but not so much formal.
I'm sure there are people listening who are at least going to want to know how to follow you on social media, if that's something you do, or are you up on social media? You're on Instagram, right?
Yeah. So all my handles are Justin for CT. I changed everything for the campaign, of course. So Justin for as the word, CT. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. I'm pretty much out there, pretty much open book. So anyone, everyone, feel free to reach out if you ever have questions.
Well, yeah, we've been going for, doesn't feel like it, but we've been going for about an hour now. Is there anything I didn't ask about that you think is important, or an aspect of your life that we didn't get to that you think is especially important to your story?
No, I think we covered pretty much everything. Where as you know, politics is politics. Mm-hmm. Covering the tics in politics is something I don't get to do much. So I appreciate that.
That's going to have to be the title of the episode.
Awesome.
Justin, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Everyone, let me know what you thought. What was the biggest takeaway for you? You can email that to tourettespodcast@gmail.com or take it to the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook, where Sophia, the greatest admin of all time, is taking care of things. Fun fact, she's not just a great admin, she's an awesome artist. Sometimes I wonder how many of the great art agents of the world have come and gone without being aware of the art power of the Tourette community. I don't know, maybe that's our next big awareness effort, to casually and coolly put out there that the Tourette community is a total powerhouse of visual art and music. Tourette'sPodcast.com is where you can get all the past episodes, as well as on geeksrising.com. Geeks Rising is the network that brings Tourette's Podcast to a wonderfully large audience. By the way, the network just participated in Livestream for the Cure, which raised well beyond the goal of $10,000 for cancer research, which is awesome. My dad's surviving his second cancer right now, and that couldn't be without advancements in research. I'm so happy to be part of Geeks Rising. These people actually care. It's the perfect home for Tourette's Podcast. Shout out to Heather from the Sunshine and Power Cuts podcast, part of the Geeks Rising network, for all the work she put into this event, the live stream for the Cure. If you don't know it yet, Heather is like the coolest person on earth. She lives off the grid down in New Zealand. Like, for real, she's off the grid. That's what her podcast is about. Sunshine and Power Cuts and connecting with nature. Again, that's at geeksrising.com. This podcast is made possible by the Tourette Association of America, online at tourette.org. So thankful for their support of Tourette's Podcast and for everything else they're always doing for the Tourette community. Patreon.com/Tourette's Podcast if you'd like to give a small amount of individual support to the show. I'm always happy to put the podcast together, but your support definitely absolutely helps with what goes into it. Find us on Twitter and Instagram as well. I'll talk to you next week. This is Ben.